The AN-SPY-1 radar array on an Arleigh Burke class destroyer sweeps continuously, covering every direction. Tracks over 100 separate contacts at once. Aircraft, missiles, fast movers, slow movers, things barely cresting the radar horizon. The fire control computer assigns track numbers, calculates intercept geometry, prioritizes threats. The picture is complete. The system knows exactly where every object is. Then a swarm of 40 Shahed-136 drones crosses the horizon, and the destroyer shoots down a fraction of them before the magazines run low. One radar, 100 tracks, a handful of intercepts. That gap between what Aegis sees and what it can actually do is not a flaw. It is the architecture of the system, built for a specific kind of war, now facing a different one. Understanding why that gap exists tells you more about modern naval warfare than any single weapon specification. Here's where this goes. The answer is not in the radar. It was never in the radar. The radar is working exactly as designed. The problem is 3 layers deeper, in fire channels, in missile economics, and in an arithmetic of attrition that favors the attacker in ways the original designers did not fully anticipate. We are going to walk through each layer. By the end, you will understand why the most capable naval air defense system ever deployed still faces a genuine threat from drones that cost less than a used car. The Arleigh Burke class destroyer entered service in 1991. The threat it was designed to defeat was the Soviet Navy's anti-ship missile. High speed, high altitude, relatively few in number. A coordinated Soviet strike might send a dozen P-700 Granite missiles at a carrier battle group. 12 targets. 12 high-value, high-speed threats with large radar cross-sections, coming in on predictable trajectories at predictable speeds. The designers of Aegis built accordingly. The system, formerly the Aegis Combat System, built by Lockheed Martin around the AN-SPY-1 phased array radar, was revolutionary because it automated the track intercept cycle. Earlier systems required a human operator to acquire each track manually, assign a weapon, and execute the engagement. Against 12 simultaneous incoming missiles, that process collapsed under cognitive load. Aegis removed the human from the loop for target acquisition and track management. The SPY-1 radar, with fixed array panels on all 4 faces of the superstructure, sweeps electronically rather than mechanically, no rotating dish, no blind spots between sweeps, continuous coverage across the entire hemisphere. The system processes millions of radar pulses per second, comparing return signatures against an onboard library of known threat profiles and assigning classification codes that determine how the combat system responds. A contact matching the radar cross-section and velocity of a P-700 Granite gets a different threat priority than a small, slow-moving aircraft. That classification logic was built around a specific threat library. Updating it takes more than a software patch. The result is a system that maintains over 100 discrete track files simultaneously. Each track has a location, a velocity vector, a threat classification, and assigned priority. The picture updates multiple times per second. Against Soviet anti-ship missiles, this was more than enough. The system could see everything coming. What the designers could not fully anticipate was what happens when the threat changes its nature entirely. Not 12 large fast missiles, 40 small slow drones. The Strait of Hormuz today is not the North Atlantic in 1985. The threat environment in the Persian Gulf now includes Iranian-manufactured Shahed-136 loitering munitions, operated by Houthi forces in Yemen, and potentially by Iranian proxies across the region. The Shahed-136 is a delta-wing design, roughly 3.5 meters in span, powered by a small piston engine. Its radar cross-section is dramatically smaller than a cruise missile, roughly equivalent to a large bird in some frequency bands, which creates a classification problem for automated threat libraries calibrated against steel-hulled supersonic weapons. Its speed, roughly 180 kilometers per hour, is a fraction of the P-700's Mach 2+. It flies low, skimming terrain or wavetops to complicate radar acquisition geometry. It flies in dispersed groups to prevent a single intercept from defeating multiple units, and it costs approximately $50,000 per unit. That cost figure is the first layer of the problem. One SM-2 Blockeye interceptor, the standard medium-range missile in the Mk-41 vertical launch system aboard an Arleigh Burke, costs approximately $2.3 million. The math runs the wrong way immediately. One intercept of one Shahed costs 46 times the value of what was destroyed. Against a swarm of 40 drones, the The expenditure in interceptors alone reaches into 9 figures before the engagement is over, but the economics are secondary to the physics. The economics matter only because the physics creates a forcing function. To understand the physics, you need to understand how Aegis actually shoots, not just how it sees. The AN-SPY-1 radar sees everything. That part is accurate. What it cannot do is illuminate every target simultaneously for missile guidance. This is the distinction that breaks most people's intuition when they first encounter it, and it is the core of the paradox. Modern surface-to-air missiles in the SM-2 family use semi-active radar homing in their terminal phase. The missile seeker listens for radar energy reflected off the target, energy that must be continuously broadcast by the launching ship. This requires a separate Illuminator radar, distinct from the SPI-1 search radar, to be pointed at the target and held there from the moment of terminal guidance handoff until intercept. On an Arleigh Burke Flight IIA destroyer, the illumination function is performed by the AN-SPY-1's associated fire control system and a small number of dedicated fire control directors. The number of targets that can be simultaneously illuminated, simultaneously engaged in the terminal phase, is not 100. It is not close to 100. The standard figure cited in open source analysis of Aegis ships is in the range of 3 to approximately 18 simultaneous engagements depending on missile variant, engagement geometry, and system configuration. This is the narrow gate. The radar sees 100. The ship shoots at a fraction of that number at once. The SM-6 interceptor, the newer variant now deployed aboard Arleigh Burke ships, uses active radar homing in its terminal phase. Its own seeker, not dependent on ship illumination. This removes the Illuminator Bottleneck for SM-6 engagements. An SM-6 does not require the ship to maintain a fire control radar beam on the target through intercept. In theory, this allows more simultaneous engagements, in theory. The second constraint is the Mk-41 vertical launch system itself. The Mk-41 is a modular silo architecture. Each cell holds one missile, cells are grouped into 8-cell modules, and a standard Arleigh Burke carries 96 cells total. Those cells are not loaded exclusively with SM-2 or SM-6 interceptors. A typical loadout distributes cells across Tomahawk cruise missiles for strike, ASROC anti-submarine rockets, and surface-to-air interceptors. The number of cells available for air defense intercept is a fraction of 96. Against a large sustained drone swarm, that fraction is finite, and it does not reload at sea. This is the wall that every mission planner and every destroyer commanding officer carries as a constant background. Fact, the magazine is not infinite, it is a fixed number, and in the Strait of Hormuz, in an engagement running through multiple waves over multiple hours, that number matters more than any individual system performance specification. Going through the technical documentation and after-action analysis from the Houthi engagement period in 2023 and 2024, one pattern keeps surfacing. The question is never whether the individual intercept works. It almost always does. The question is whether the ship can afford to execute that intercept given what is still incoming. Put yourself in the seat of the tactical action officer aboard USS Carney, DDG-64, Arleigh Burke Flight I, deployed to the Red Sea in late 2023. The threat picture on the Aegis display shows inbound contacts. The system has assigned track numbers to all of them. The combat system is computing intercept solutions for each. The TO has to decide which tracks get an SM-2, which get an SM-6, which get handed to the close-in defenses, and which might be allowed to run out their course because they probably are not going to hit the ship. Every SM-2 or SM-6 that leaves the Mk-41 cell is gone until the ship returns to port with reloading facilities. There is no reloading at sea for vertical launch systems. The reload cycle for a warship in active operations is measured not in minutes but in days, port call, crane operations, safety procedures, magazine handling. In an extended conflict scenario in the Strait of Hormuz, a destroyer that expends its air defense interceptors against a sustained drone campaign could find itself in an area of active operations with no remaining long-range air defense capability. The swarm strategy exploits this constraint directly. Quantity creates the forcing function. Before getting to the economic layer, it is worth pausing on what the Combat Information Center actually looks like during one of these engagements, because the physical environment aboard the ship shapes decisions in ways that no system specification captures. The CIC aboard an Arleigh Burke is a windowless space below the main deck, lit primarily by the blue-green glow of display terminals. It is designed to be survivable, internal to the hull, away from blast and fragmentation exposure. During an active engagement, it is loud. Electronic warfare systems generate their own emissions and countermeasures, producing sounds through the ship's sensors that have to be filtered from the tactical picture. The ventilation system pushes conditioned air through the space continuously. Operators communicate in short, clipped exchanges developed over years of training, each designed to transmit maximum information in minimum syllables. Track bearing, range, speed, classification, recommended action. The TAO acknowledges. The commanding officer, standing or seated nearby, may modify the recommendation or approve it. The fire control system executes. All of this, from track acquisition to missile away, can happen in under a minute for a well-trained crew against a well-characterized threat. Against a novel threat, against a contact the automated classification system is uncertain about, against a target whose flight profile does not cleanly match any entry in the threat library, the timeline stretches. Uncertainty in classification translates directly into delay at the decision point, and delay, when the inbound contact is traveling at even 180 kilometers per hour, has geometric consequences. Every second of hesitation at the classification stage is another 50 meters of closure. The sailors working those consoles, aviation warfare specialists, fire control men, electronic warfare operators, are trained to function under exactly this kind of pressure. Their training pipelines are long, their qualification standards rigorous, and their workload during an active threat engagement is genuinely among the most cognitively demanding tasks performed by any military personnel anywhere. That human element is essential to understanding why the gap between what Aegis sees and what it shoots is not simply a technical problem. It is a human-machine teaming problem, and the swarm strategy directly targets it. Here is the central dilemma, worth restating at the halfway point. The ship can see everything, but it cannot shoot everything. And what it does shoot at, it can only shoot at a finite number of times before it has nothing left to shoot with. The swarm does not need to overwhelm the radar. It needs to overwhelm the magazine, or force enough expenditure that the ship's commander begins conserving interceptors for higher value threats. And in that moment of conservation, something gets through. The economic asymmetry gets the most discussion in defense analysis communities, and it deserves careful treatment because it is often oversimplified. The Shahed-136, produced in Iran and transferred or licensed to Houthi forces in Yemen, has a reported unit cost of approximately $50,000. Some estimates run lower. The warhead is small, roughly 40 to 50 kilograms of explosive, sufficient to damage rather than destroy a large naval vessel in most scenarios, but enough to destroy an unprotected commercial tanker or cause fires and personnel casualties aboard a warship if it detonates in the right location. The drone's navigation is primarily GPS guided with a reported inertial backup, meaning that electronic warfare systems which spoof or jam GPS signals may not fully defeat a unit that has already locked onto its target using inertial reference. That navigational redundancy is not accidental. It is a deliberate engineering choice to complicate the defender's electronic warfare response. The SM-2 block ion interceptor costs approximately $2.3 million. The SM-6 costs approximately $4 million. The cost-exchange ratio for a single Shahed intercepted by an SM-6 is roughly 80-1, unfavorable to the defender. This ratio is not an accident. It is the deliberate exploitation of a structural feature of modern naval air defense. High-end interceptors are designed to defeat high-end threats, maneuvering supersonic cruise missiles, ballistic missile reentry vehicles, advanced air-launched weapons. Against those targets, the cost of the interceptor is justified by the value of what it is protecting and the severity of what it is defeating. The economic logic works. Against a $50,000 drone, the logic inverts. What's most surprising about this dynamic is not the ratio itself. Defense planners knew asymmetric cost exchange was a vulnerability. What's surprising is how quickly it became operationally relevant. The transition from theoretical vulnerability to demonstrated tactical reality happened in the Red Sea over a period of months in late 2023 and early 2024, as USS Carney and other Arleigh Burke destroyers engaged repeated waves of Houthi drones and cruise missiles. In one reported engagement period, A single destroyer expended over a dozen SM-2 interceptors across multiple engagements, a dozen SM-2s at $2+ million each, against targets costing a fraction of 1% of that per unit, and the ship's magazine is now measurably depleted. It is worth pausing to consider what the production asymmetry looks like from the industrial base perspective, because it compounds the operational problem in ways tactical discussions often miss. Iran's defense industrial complex, specifically the Shahed Aviation Industries Research Center and associated facilities, can almost certainly produce Shahed-136 airframes faster than the United States can produce SM-6 interceptors. The SM-6 production line at Raytheon is a sophisticated manufacturing enterprise requiring precision components, quality-controlled propellant, and a supply chain spanning dozens of subcontractors across multiple states. Lead times for missile procurement are measured in years from contract award to delivered rounds. The Shahed airframe uses commercial off-the-shelf engine components, sheet aluminum structure, and a simplified guidance package that can be manufactured in facilities that look, from satellite imagery, more like agricultural workshops than aerospace factories. Quantity has its own arithmetic. One side is counting cells in a Mk-41. The other side is counting airframes in a production queue. The Phalanx CIWS, the close-in weapon system, the radar-directed 20mm Vulcan cannon mounted on deck, exists as a last-ditch layer to handle threats that make it past the outer defenses. Phalanx fires approximately 4,500 rounds per minute and engages targets at ranges out to roughly 1,500 meters. Against a drone approaching at 180 kilometers per hour, that gives an engagement window measured in seconds. Phalanx ammunition does not run out the same way interceptors do. The gun can be reloaded at sea from ship's stores. Its cost per engagement is dramatically lower, but its effective range means any threat it engages is already close enough that a detonating warhead, even if the drone is destroyed, may be within blast radius of the ship. Debris from a Phalanx kill at 500 meters falls into the water alongside the hull. Debris from a Phalanx kill at 150 meters may land on deck. The difference between those two outcomes is milliseconds of reaction time and the precise geometry of the engagement. Neither produces the clean zero-damage result of a long-range SM-6 intercept. The layered defense architecture, SM-6 at long range, SM-2 at medium range, Phalanx and rolling airframe missiles at close range, makes logical sense against a small number of high-value inbound threats. Against a coordinated multi-wave swarm, the layers begin interacting in ways that create decision tree pressure at every level. Here is the part that seems counterintuitive until you think about it from the attacker's perspective. The swarm does not have to be accurate. It does not have to defeat Aegis. It does not even have to sink the ship. It needs to be present in sufficient quantity that the defender faces a choice with costs on both sides. Option 1. Intercept every Shahed with an SM-2 or SM-6. The ship is protected. The magazine depletes at ruinous cost-exchange ratios. The ship remains capable but diminished. Repeat this over 3 or 4 engagements in a week, and the ship needs to leave station for reload. The strait is now less defended. Option 2. Conserve the long-range interceptors. Hand off lower-priority drones to Phalanx and electronic warfare systems. Accept that some threats get closer than is comfortable before being engaged. The magazine lasts longer. But the risk envelope for the ship expands. Something small and slow that was evaluated as low priority may prove to be exactly the weapon designed to exploit that evaluation. Neither option is clean, neither is free. The attacker has created a situation where the defender pays a price for any choice made. There is a third dimension to this decision tree that receives less attention in open source discussion, but that anyone familiar with operational planning literature will recognize. The commanding officer of an Arleigh Burke is not making engagement decisions in isolation. Every expenditure decision is reportable. Every SM-2 that leaves a cell generates a logistics flag in the supply chain system, a depletion event that propagates up through the fleet management structure to 5th Fleet Headquarters in Bahrain, to Naval Forces Central Command, and ultimately to OPNAV in Washington. The reporting requirements are not bureaucratic overhead. They are how the force maintains situational awareness of its own aggregate magazine depth across all deployed assets. But they also mean that the CO knows his expenditures are visible. That awareness is another variable in the decision calculus. The instinct to conserve, to not be the ship that burned through interceptors on low-value targets, is not irrational. It is a reasonable response to an organizational environment that tracks consumption. The swarm exploits that instinct as surely as it exploits the physics of the Illuminator Bottleneck. This is the strategic logic of the drone swarm. Stripped of any political framing, it is an arithmetic attack on a decision tree. The goal is not to win a single engagement. The goal is to degrade the decision space available to the defender over time. Here is the take that will probably generate disagreement. The common framing of this problem, more capable interceptors, better electronics, faster phalanx, misses the central issue. The Aegis combat system is not the constraint. The Mk-41 is not even the deepest constraint. The constraint is the assumption embedded in the cost structure of US naval air defense, that high-end interceptors are an acceptable cost per engagement because the threats they face are also high-end. That assumption held for 40 years of Cold War deterrence and post-Cold War deployments. The Houthi engagement period in the Red Sea is the clearest evidence yet that it has expired. Cheap, expendable. Mass-produced threats priced in the tens of thousands of dollars will continue to be produced faster than $2 million interceptors can be manufactured, deployed, and expended. The math does not close on the defender's side. What strikes us about this is that the solution set is genuinely uncertain. This is not a case where the answer is obvious and merely awaiting implementation. The candidate responses, directed energy weapons like the high-energy laser systems being developed for shipboard use, electronic warfare to spoof drone navigation, and lower-cost interceptors from programs like the Enduring Shield, each address part of the problem, and none address all of it. Directed energy has range and magazine depth advantages, but is weather-dependent and power-limited on current hull designs. A high-energy laser that can defeat a Shahed-136 in clear conditions at 2 kilometers may struggle to maintain beam coherence through the maritime haze and salt spray environment that characterizes the Red Sea and Persian Gulf for significant portions of the operational calendar. Electronic warfare is effective against GPS-guided systems, but less effective against systems using inertial navigation or optical terminal guidance. Lower-cost interceptors help with the exchange ratio, but still require Mk-41 cells that are finite. The human reality behind all of this is carried by the sailors aboard Arleigh Burke destroyers rotating through deployments in the Red Sea and the Persian Gulf. A crew of roughly 280 officers and enlisted personnel, operating a ship that costs about $2 billion to build and roughly $1 million a day to operate at sea. Executing engagement after engagement in a sustained threat environment while managing a magazine that cannot be refilled without leaving station. Those sailors are maintaining a deployment tempo that has accelerated substantially since the beginning of the Houthi campaign. Arleigh Burke destroyers, scheduled for 6-month deployments, have in several cases had their deployments extended. Maintenance cycles that would normally occur at predictable intervals have been compressed or deferred. The ships are being asked to do more, for longer, in a more actively hostile environment than their operational schedules were originally built around. The human cost of that, measured in time away from families, in deferred personal milestones, in the accumulated fatigue of sustained high-alert watch-standing, does not appear in any weapons specification document. It is real nonetheless. The commanding officer of one of these ships, making the call to expend or conserve on each incoming track, is operating at the intersection of tactical reality and strategic mathematics. The Aegis system tells him exactly what is in the sky. It does not tell him whether the magazine will last until the relief ship arrives. One detail that stays with me from the open-source record of the Red Sea engagements. In several reported cases, the decision to engage with Phalanx rather than expend another SM-2 was described not as a failure of the system but as a deliberate choice, a resource management decision made under pressure in real time. That decision, made correctly, reflects competent tactical judgment. Made incorrectly once, it is a news story of a different kind. The Strait of Hormuz sees between 15 and 17 million barrels of oil pass through it daily. Every major Arleigh Burke deployment in the region exists partly to keep that passage open. The interaction between naval operations and global energy markets is not abstract. Every extended deployment, every engagement sequence, every question about magazine depth aboard a destroyer is happening in the context of a waterway whose disruption would immediately affect energy prices globally. The 21-mile-wide navigable channel at the Strait's narrowest point is one of the most consequential geographic choke points on the planet, and its security depends in part on the credibility of U.S. naval presence. That credibility is measured not only by whether ships are present, but by whether those ships retain the combat capability to actually defend the passage after weeks of sustained engagement operations. A destroyer on station with 3 SM-6 rounds remaining in its air defense cells is present. Whether it is credible is a different question. The ships are the mechanism through which a certain kind of stability is maintained. Their vulnerability is not a secret. The question of how long that mechanism remains adequate, given the evolution of the threat, is one that naval planners in the Pentagon and adversary planners in Tehran are both working through simultaneously, with access to much of the same public information about Aegis capabilities and Mk-41 cell counts that we are discussing here. Will the next generation of naval air defense close this gap, or will mass-produced drone technology always stay one step ahead of the magazine? Comment yes if you think directed energy changes the equation within a decade. Comment no if you think the economics favor the swarm for the foreseeable future. We read every response. The AN-SPY-1 radar on an Arleigh Burke class destroyer sees over 100 tracks. That capability is real and remarkable. The fire control system selects, prioritizes, and executes engagements with a speed no human team could match. The SM-6 interceptor is one of the most capable air defense weapons ever put to sea, and a swarm of 40 Shahed-136 drones, priced in the millions against interceptors priced in the hundreds of millions, is a genuine tactical problem that the radar's capability does not resolve. Because the radar is not the limiting factor. The magazine is. The cost exchange is. The time between waves and the time to reload are. The decision tree under pressure is. Aegis sees everything, it cannot shoot everything. And what it shoots, it can only shoot a finite number of times before the arithmetic shifts. That is not a failure of American naval engineering. It is the shape of the problem the current generation of naval commanders is handed, in the actual strait, against the actual threat, with the actual ships that exist today. The next question, what comes after? What replaces the current cost equation? What the next Arleigh Burke or the next defensive layer looks like? That is the subject of the next brief. If you want to understand the full picture of how the US Navy is trying to answer this problem, that one is worth your time.